Everyone. Hi and welcome to this edition of Hult's Thought Leadership webinar series, where we will explore the hottest topics affecting society and business today. For those who are joining a Hult event for the first time, just a bit of background about us. So Hult have designed a school that looks to the future by focusing on developing your leadership skills, challenging you with a future-oriented curriculum, and building a global perspective that only first-hand experience can bring. We currently offer an undergraduate program, 5 specialist one-year master programs, and a 1-year global MBA, and a uniquely flexible part-time executive MBA. So more information on our programs and the upcoming scholarship deadline can be found at hult.edu. Today, we're actually joined by Hult Professor Olaf Groth and Dr. Mark Nitzberg, and they are here to explore one of this year's hottest topic, artificial intelligence. Before we begin, just a little bit of housekeeping. This webinar will last around an hour in total, and we will have time for questions at the end. A recording of the webinar will also be sent to everyone after the event. And if you wish to ask any questions, please write it in the Q&A at the bottom right-hand corner. We will then put these questions to Chris at the end and Mark. So basically, Dan Zier, he will also introduce himself shortly, and also Mark and Olaf. And yeah, over to you, Dan. Tell us who you are and how this session is going to be led. Thank you.
Well, Thank you. Appreciate it. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for taking some time out and joining us here this morning, this afternoon, this evening, wherever you may be around the planet. Good day to all of you. My name is Dan Zier. I am in Austin, Texas, sitting here on a cold Austin day at the moment. Joined here, of course, by Olaf Groth and Mark Nitzberg. Olaf is the CEO of the Cambrian Group, and he's a professor at Hult, professor for global strategy, innovation, and economics. Mark Nitzberg is the executive director at the Center for Human Compatible AI, which is based at University of California at Berkeley. And he's the head of the strategic outreach for the Berkeley AI Research Lab, also there at Cal. Mark and Olaf joined together to write Solomon's Code, the book that we'll be pulling much of this discussion from, looking at mostly artificial intelligence, but also its related sort of cousin technologies, which might be robotics, autonomous cars, all those sorts of advanced technologies that are either powered by artificial intelligence or very much connected to it. Just really quickly, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Dan Zier. I am the editor-in-chief here at the Cambrian Group and also help edit and work on the book as well. So with that, I'll just, and since we only have an hour, I'll just kick right into it and kick over to Olaf and Mark. Gentlemen, what prompted this idea? What prompted you to write this book? And why is this such a critical topic now? Why is it so important that we look at this now?
Thank you, Dan. That's an excellent question. And with Mark's permission, I'll kick us off with an answer here and then hand over to Mark. First of all, it is a real pleasure to be with you all globally, no matter where you are in the world. As Therese outlined, we take pride in educating the global generation and giving a good outlook on what the future might hold. And that is, in fact, the spirit in which we wrote the book. We wrote the book with the help of about 30 to 35 current Hult students as well as alumni, because we wanted to give a global outlook on where artificial intelligence is today, not just in the leading nations, China and the United States, but also other countries that are tremendously important for the advancement and the application of these technologies. So Dan met Mark and me about 2 years ago when Mark and I had just decided that there is just too much hype out there about the topic of artificial intelligence, very entertaining narratives about Terminator scenarios and the Skynet taking over and Mr. Musk and Mr. Hawking striking fear in us, saying that AI has the risk or the danger of enslaving or killing all of us. And we felt that there is some valid concern around the safety and security of artificial intelligence. And certainly there's a role for people to ring the alarm bells longer term, but that if we focused only on that, that we would really miss the larger potential of artificial intelligence in terms of both economic and human growth. And that potential is tremendous, like we said, around the world. Of course, there are risks as well, and we believe those risks are already here, and we're happy to talk about them. But by just focusing on death and destruction, 30, 40, 50, 60 years out, and a general intelligence which may never happen or can only happen on a timeline of 50 to 7 years, that we would miss all of this wonderful opportunity as well as short-term risk. Right? Over to you, Mark.
I would just add that explaining AI in light of the cartoonish presentations of it in Hollywood is very important. And one of the things that we need worldwide is a higher level of literacy around technology and around AI. And so that's another reason that we thought it was time for a book like this.
Sorry about that. AI has been around for, depending on how you look at it, either a while or a relatively short period of time, depending on the comparison. Essentially, since around the mid to late 1950s, it's a relatively new technology, all things considered. But we have seen it go through several waves of high interest and low interest as well. What's different about this time around? Obviously, it's on a huge upswing. A big push. What's different about its role in sort of this sort of coming industrial revolution, or this emerging industrial revolution that may be different from what we saw with the personal computer or prior major transformations?
Yeah, so you're quite right, Dan. Artificial intelligence has been around, depending on how you define it, for the better part of 60 to 70 years. So what is different now? And the short answer is scale. Scale is different today. The first one is the scale of computing power, right? So the pure power of processors and computers around the world to digest a much larger amount of data that we have today than we have had any time in history. So that's the second answer, is the scale of data, right? Matched with the scale of computing power. And then, of course, on top of that, we have had some significant breakthroughs, about 3 or so over the last 1 to 1.5 decades, especially when it comes to machine learning and deep learning, that then fell on fertile ground, right? Because these breakthroughs would have been useless if we hadn't had the right computing power and the right amount of data, so that these algorithms, these neural network algorithms, could go to town on all of that information. If you ask me about the broader question of how is this cognitive revolution or this AI revolution different from previous revolutions such as the industrial one, then I'd have to say that's because this one is getting into our heads. It is automating decisions, right? Previously, we have automated physical processes. Now we are automating thought processes. And so the impact of that is much more pervasive throughout society. So now we are not just impacting people who previously were preoccupied with manual labor, farm labor, but today we are actually impacting people who are in white-collar jobs and who are seeing part of what they do every day automated, right? So that's also why it's different. And of course, we can talk about structural changes that flow from that, such as industries being taken apart, the need for new business models, and so on and so forth. But it goes much further than that. Artificial intelligence is going to disrupt and redesign life processes and life patterns for all of us as we increasingly utilize these technologies. Right? Would you add anything to that?
I would just get back to the scale issue. the first wave of AI that really made it into any industry was during a period where if there was a computer, it was either on a desk or in its own computing center, and we were not all carrying computers around in our pockets. And so that it had some impact on finance, and it made a little bit of a headway in healthcare, but it didn't really touch all of us in a way that it does now.
That's an interesting point with the phones. I'm so used to thinking of my phone as like having a computer in my pocket, but it's also essentially a tracking device, something that can monitor or measure a lot of what I do in my everyday life, whether it's location or interaction, the content I'm consuming, whatever it might be. It's a two-way street. So
that's, that's very true, Dan. I mean, even things that are seem rather menial to us, right? Like measuring battery levels and charging cycles in your phone, which some micro lending apps that use artificial intelligence are now taking as one variable to assess whether you are creditworthy, right? So we are dealing with a brave new world of micro slicing and dicing of the most minute types of activities, digital activities.
We've seen this in several examples in the book. In Solomon's Code, you looked at a variety of examples, but we generally group them in these ideas of value, trust, and power relationships. And we talked about those themes, how artificial intelligence and similar advanced technologies are influencing human values and the trust we have in each other and in companies and in technologies, and the power relationships, whether it's between individuals or just on a global scale. Maybe to help drive that home a little bit, can you give us an example of how AI might influence these? And maybe we can kick off with values. Give us a sense for how that sort of plays out.
Let me answer that with a quick look and possibly a novel look at what's been happening with news feeds. Most of us read some part of the news online, on our phones or on our computers, and those are unlike a newspaper, which is put together by editors and then a fixed newspaper distributed to everyone. Those are varied. And the feed that you get, every one of those articles in the order in which they come is selected by an AI algorithm called adaptive reinforcement learning. The idea is to give you something that's tailored to your tastes. And that makes great sense. It would be, the best use of your time to see things that are most interesting to you up front. The problem is that an algorithm like that assumes that people are fixed and unchanging. They have tastes, and we'll just find out what they are, and then we'll feed a series of articles that suit those tastes. The mistake that's behind that, it's somewhat subtle, but turns out to have drastic consequences, is that people's tastes are changed and changeable by what they see. And so that algorithm, in seeking to maximize your engagement and how many times you click and like and so on, is actually changing your taste. And it turns out to have driven people towards more extreme, at the more extreme end of the political spectrum. And that's had some astonishing consequences.
Yeah, and maybe I'll take it from here by saying, all of that is, of course, based on big commercial interests wanting to analyze our data footprint, right? So it's in their interest to get us to act, to react, to be stimulated, to be sparked. And we like to. Look, I'm active on social media, and I'm about as digital as they come. And I derive a lot of pleasure and a lot of value. My life is richer because of it, but it is also, as Mark rightly outlines, treacherous territory, because you never know who is sparking you for what reason. And therein lies power, right? The power to be able to know you really well and to know you in terms of what are your triggers, what are your psychological triggers to react and to dialogue with somebody, or to willingly transition into one of these camps that Mark is mentioning. So there's real commercial, social, and political power behind who controls these algorithms, and how these algorithms are acting on incentives, whether political or economic. So that is one level of power, and we believe that the large global internet companies, the big, 7 to 9, depending on how you slice it. So that is, of course, Google and Amazon, Facebook and Apple, potentially at some point Netflix, and then LinkedIn and Microsoft, as well as the 3 or 4 big Chinese ones, Alibaba, Baidu, and Tencent. There is a whole second tier that's coming now. Those are probably one of the, or some of the most powerful institutions in our world economy, because they are increasingly analyzing who we are and helping steer our lives. That's one level of power. The second level of power is that the quality of our data varies, right? So if you live in a thoroughly digital economy, such as China or the United States, we of course have problems with biases, etc., ingrained in our data sets. But if you are, very active on social media, you are a very desirable target for advertisers. Then that means people are drawn to you because you transact a lot and you have quite a bit of leverage, right? We are not yet exercising that leverage because we don't have ownership over our data, but that will come. But now imagine somebody who lives in a socioeconomically underdeveloped area. And, obviously some developing countries come to mind. Kai-Fu Lee described this as digital or data colonialism, because many of the citizens living in those countries are not yet digitally literate, have imperfect, very spotty data footprints. And that means they are not, in theory, as empowered or as desirable to these platforms as some of us are who are thoroughly digital. But we must not, we don't really have to go to developing countries to see this. If you're going to a socioeconomically underprivileged area, even in the United States, you will find that there are people there with very sparse data footprints. And they're underpowered and under-empowered as well, right? So lots and lots of problems around power. Imagine people deciding, I want to not be part of this AI revolution. I want to go off the grid and not be trackable all the time. What does that mean for their power, for their empowerment in the global economy? Do they go dark? Do they have any leverage anymore? Do they have any voice anymore in the global economy? Right. So that, of course, has a lot to do with power in and of itself. And this confluence of values, as Mark described, and power then raises the big question of trust. Do we trust the big internet companies? Do we trust the advertisers? Do we trust the people who inject political messaging into our social media platforms? Do we trust each other, right? What's the veracity, or the verity, I should say, of some of that information that is transpiring on these platforms? That's a big question. And trust is single-handedly, I think, the most important currency in the world, whether it's social or economic currency. So, cash, you can always get more cash. But trust, once it's lost, it is really hard to get back, right? So trust needs to be rebuilt and secured.
It's interesting too, trust in what we consume in this day and age with new models like generative adversarial networks and that sort of thing, getting better and better at making, say, a video that looks as if I'm saying something I would never say, for example, or having Obama look like he's delivering one of Trump's speeches or something like that. At some point, you start questioning, what am I consuming? Is this legitimate? Is this authentic? Or is this just an excellent fake? Sometimes it's hard to tell. Starting to see some questions coming here already, so I'm going to mix some of these in here now too. But let me before we start to get to those, we talk a lot about where different countries are, and there's a lot of discussion about kind of an AI race. So you see it both in the private sector and the large companies and the power that they're gaining with another tier coming on. So there's a distinction there. But we also see it sort of geopolitically, China and the US clearly ahead on these matters, and with other countries in various tiers below that. We're getting to, there's a discussion, and you mentioned Kai-Fu Lee, who suggests that China is in sort of the driver's seat now for a lot of types of AI, because it's entering in what he called an age of implementation, the idea of putting it into practice now and China having an advantage there. Give me a sense for, first of all, whether you agree with that, and I know the answer already, but let everyone else know what you think about that. But also give us a sense of how this starts to play out, how this is affecting not just our individual lives, but the way countries are pitted against countries and companies pitted against companies.
So I would admit readily that neither Kai-Fu Lee nor we like the term of an AI race. And that's because the notion of a race is unnecessarily zero sum. There's a winner and there's losers. And we just don't think that that is necessarily the way things play out in business or in the global economy. And so that is a bit overhyped. Why is it overhyped? Because, everybody loves a good headline and everybody loves a good competition. And, we're seeing headlines now of a second Cold War breaking out between the US and China, and therefore the term race seems to play into that, and it just gives excitement and also false illusions that we are sort of in this very binary situation, right? Kai-Fu Lee is right that China is leading on the consumer data front, so they have been able to penetrate their society. Online meets offline, OMO. Meaning a lot of AI applications are now empowering bricks and mortar offline businesses, and that penetration has proceeded much faster and much more pervasively throughout the Chinese economy than it has throughout, let's say, European or American, frankly, the rest of the world as well. So that is definitely true. We disagree with him on the business enterprise data front, where the United States still has develops and generates more data and more AI power. And we also agree on the military operational front, because the United States, for better or for worse, does have a lot of experience and a lot of data from these environments, and those do play a role in global innovation systems, right? So all of those together, we believe the United States is still in the lead when it comes to both data as well as science and R&D on almost every metric that we have examined as part of a large study for a European client. Bar maybe one or two metrics, the US still comes out ahead. Now, that said, the other reason for why we don't like the term race is that we are seeing much more innovation happening around the world than just in these two countries. And I'll let my friend Mark maybe elaborate on that. But we're seeing examples in Israel, in the UK, obviously, in places like Indonesia, Japan, Nigeria, that are quite breathtaking. And in fact, we were very lucky to work with these 35 Hult students and alumni to get to some of these examples, because there's no other business school out there that's as globally distributed. We have 140 countries represented in our Hult student portfolio. So we thought, what better asset to have than to mobilize those to get us a local view of what's happening. And there was quite a lot happening there. Before I hand over to Mark, I will tell you that where I see this headed is an emergence of different models around the world, right? So you have, I started with China, so let me pick up on China first. You have China promulgating this AI paradigm and data paradigm throughout the Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI, which is 65 countries, 46% of global GDP. That's a massive amount of consumers and economic power around the world. They're rolling out their technologies now in lots of places along that Belt and Road Initiative, in addition to places like Venezuela. This works particularly well for countries that are less than democratic and where privacy and free speech are subordinate values to stability and control and social peace. And so we're seeing that model, and we're also seeing the U.S. model, which is very laissez-faire. So the don't regulate it before you've proven that there is harm done model that is currently experiencing a bit of a slump because people are saying, heck, we can't have these abuses. Who is going to call some of these internet giants, American internet giants, to order? And we have yet to receive an answer on that. And then there's the European model, which is very much in favor of protecting the dignity, the personhood, the privacy of the individual, as evidenced through its recent General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, that has had very extraterritorial effects into the United States and elsewhere, because if you want to do business in Europe, digital business, you have to be compliant with GDPR or incur billions of dollars in fines. That model is a bit of a problem on the innovation side, and I'm happy to dive into that time permitting, right? And then, of course, we've got lots of other countries around the world that are making great use of AI to fill social economic infrastructure development gaps, right? That would be a fourth camp. Mark, anything to add on that front?
Well, I would take it in a technical direction. I'm sort of the technical conscience of the team here, and just point out that the aspects of AI that require critical mass, and that's huge government level investments, will naturally accrue to the U.S. and China and Europe acting as a single entity. For example, requiring masses of data and masses of compute power. But there are other breakthroughs that will be coming, and these can come from anywhere, where essentially anyone, in a small village with just enough access to the internet and a little bit of education can really innovate in terms of algorithms, and so there's a lot of innovation, a lot of invention happening all over the world, and we got some glimpses of that in our interviews.
Yeah, the book is rich in examples from all over the world that are really breathtaking, from empowering people to be part of the economic process, thereby giving them a political voice, to healing people in remote islands of Indonesia, and of course there fun about writing this book with Mark and you is that Mark rightly said he is sort of the technical responsibility voice of this. I come at this from more of a global trends and economics and policy and politics angle. And really why we had that combination is the fact that with AI, because it's getting into people's heads, because it has such an impact, positive and negative, on our societies, really ethics is no longer optional, right? Ethics, responsibility, and technology are now tied by the hip. And if there was ever any doubt to any entrepreneur in technology that that's the case, that doubt has recently been erased, whether it's by way of, China's social credit system or, similar surveillance measures here in the United States, or Mr. Putin saying, those who control artificial intelligence will eventually run the world, right? Which is slightly over-dramatized statement, but not wrong. We believe that this is the era where we have to be responsible as business leaders, as economists, as technologists, and therefore we had this combination on our team, right?
Yeah, it worked really well. I mean, and certainly from my perspective, kind of helping put this together and frame it for a general audience. I mean, that combination was, it just struck the right balance of getting the technical aspects and concerns about that with what's happening, how it's affecting us. And I think that fits really well with a lot of the questions we're getting coming in. A lot of them wondering about specifically the impact of these technologies on jobs. What will some of the jobs of the future look like? How will they be affected? We had one question about programming specifically. Will AI replace programmers eventually? Give us a sense for how you see these cognitive technologies affecting different industries and different jobs, especially for an audience that I imagine is a lot of students here sort of wondering what their future is going to look like. How is AI going to play into that? Are there jobs that are just going to disappear, or how will they be changed? Give us a sense of how you're thinking about the future role of AI in the workplace.
Sure, I'm going to make a start, and then maybe Mark can pick up on, he's done some interesting travels in the world of robotics as well that are probably a good augment to the answer. So here's the net effect of it. We all, and that includes you, Dan, Mark, and me, and our hopefully prospective students on the line, have to get used to what we have dubbed or called symbiotic intelligence between humans and machines going forward. We're all used to certain mechanized value that is expressed in our laptops and our phones, but now these devices are getting much smarter, and we will be coming up against very smart narrow intelligence in our devices. Witness Alexa now being able to sense whether you are sad or ill. That is probably akin to, a very astute dog or a, 3-5-year-old toddler who can pick up on certain sentiments and certain activities. And so we have to get used to smarter and smarter narrow intelligence. That means that we have to think about what we as humans are really good at, which parts of us can be automated in terms of our thought processes, and which parts cannot be. And here it is really important to draw the line between very linear, analytical, very structured and routine thought processes that computers can pick up with AI, and those thought processes that are much more complex and multi-level that we as humans are really good at, right? So most of us humans are not very good at computing with the raw processing power of a machine. We're just not fast enough. We have a very efficient brain consuming very little energy to do a lot of great things, but we are just not as empowered with raw horsepower as a machine is. But we can do things like planning on different levels and along different time horizons all at the same time. We can transpose knowledge and insights from one area to another area. We can decide what game to play, not just how to win at a certain game like a chess computer can. We have things like empathy, love, compassion that machines cannot yet emulate. We might get there in 20, 30 years, and there are people working on those things, but so far a machine is not able to emulate the fact that all of us, millions of years ago, proverbially crawled out of the primordial slime together, and we have that shared genetic experience, right? So when we talk to each other over a cup of coffee or a meal, and we talk to each other about successes and failures and challenges and reasons to be happy, first love and last love and all those things, we can relate because we've all been there in one way or another. And that is immensely powerful, right? So all of those things are very human, and we need to get much better at being human, right? Which is also why we at Hult have introduced what we call a soft skills track, which is a bit of a misnomer, but it essentially is an emotional intelligence track that allows you to become much better at being human, right? How many times have we been on the phone with a call center person and we got frustrated because they are too mechanical? Well, the problem is we're training them to act like machines rather than human beings with empathy and compassion and reasoning, right? That's another thing the machine can't yet do, to actually reason. Or things like going out and inquiring, exercising curiosity, discovering things about the world, all like out of our own energy, our own drive. All of that the machine can't do yet. So we are, of course, realistic. We believe in the McKinsey numbers, for instance. The numbers vary a little bit depending on which consultancy you ask, but we could be looking at a world where 40% of all jobs could have as much as 30% of all of their tasks automated, and yet the other stuff is fairly defensible. It's we humans are very good at certain things, or should be good at certain things machines can't do. But we need to train people. And time is of the essence, because we really cannot waste any minute anymore, right? To train ourselves in those things. So that's the general picture, and maybe Mark can say a few things also about physical jobs, because for the first time now, thinking jobs could be more threatened than physical jobs, right? Because robots can still not do certain things.
Let me answer one of the questions that came in. Dan, you said that someone was asking, is computer programming going to be automated away by AI? And I think the answer is no. If you watch the course of what the job is to be a coder over the last 15 years, it's been evolving, and now any coder worth her salt will be learning new languages and new techniques continually. So that's already required. This is before AI is coming in. It's just that there are tools that take care of the details, right? Back at the beginning, a compiler would take a high-level description and turn it into the low-level machine code, and so that compiler changed the job of the programmer, right? The original programmers were just turning switches and putting the machine code in directly. Then there's a higher-level language where you describe it in something that's a little closer to English. And now there's a wide range of languages and a lot of tools and frameworks that are evolving. I do have a friend who is working on completely automating programming, and I don't believe he's going to do it in his lifetime. But he took the same system that was trained to perform well on video games, and you do that by feeding a certain system the parameters where they can turn the knobs and then play the game, and they just turn the knobs somewhat at random and learn how to turn the knobs in order to get the score to go up, right? And pointed that instead of at a video game, at the programming tasks in GitHub that are debugging existing programs. So you give it examples there, and I haven't heard from him in 2 years, so I don't think that really is a threat at this point. It is entirely a process that just by trial and error, the statistics make it prohibitive. You would just need to do quintillions and quintillions of different random programs to get the right program to perform what you want to do.
So here again, the topic being heuristics is something the machine cannot yet do very well, and things like non-routine tasks, even in programming. Berkeley and MIT have picked this up and are now training their electrical and computer engineering talent in all kinds of things, like anything from philosophy to anthropology to sociology, psychology, and probably EQ as well, right? So make your work as non-routine as you can as this automation threat comes in. You know, the other thing that I thought we could touch on briefly, Mark, is, you know, the robotics, right? Robots, and what can and can they not do yet, which is why manual labor may in fact not be yet on its way out, right?
So we have a group that's been working on the grasping problem, right? Being able to pick up any arbitrary object in a way that doesn't break it.
Right.
And after 35 years, they feel that they are possibly coming around the corner, and they may be able to grasp objects of any shape and pick them up. But right now, the cost of a robot is about the same for the hand as it is for the rest of the robot, right? There's so many things that a hand can do, and it looks like there are, you know, there are now levels of you know, the possibility of a robot doing something that we consider very simple. I think, for example, we talked about a robot that can do dishes, right? Those things that we consider simple menial tasks are extremely hard for robots, right? You need the hands, and you need the planning of motions and so forth that are still far out in the future. So I think there's some, you know, some sense that we'll be taking care of very specific tasks, but the things that we consider somewhat menial may elude us for quite some time in terms of robots taking those tasks.
If you're an accountant who likes to just sit in a dark chamber all day long, then I would worry. If you are a carpenter, I would not worry. You know, that there's a distinction there.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. I mean, we're getting a few more questions about like specific jobs that might be disappearing, or you know, folks who are in management wondering, you know, at what point does AI sort of take care of most of my managing tasks and make me redundant? I think maybe I'd underscore a bit of what you were saying already. There are certain parts of every job, or most jobs, that these technologies will be able to replicate to one degree or another. But there are also many tasks within all these jobs that these technologies are nowhere near being able to replicate, and may never. And the idea of combining, you know, your skills, your human intelligence, and innate advantages as a human, combined with the innate advantages of a machine, actually produce something better. And one point, I'll just interject quick, we talked to some chess grandmasters about the idea of what they called centaur chess, where a computer could beat a human, but a human and computer together could beat a computer. That combination, that symbio intelligence, ends up being much more powerful and productive and advantageous, and frankly can get rid of a lot of the boring, dull stuff that we don't want to do anyway. So yeah, I'll just throw that in quickly. Sorry, go ahead, Olaf.
No, I mean, I was just going to reinforce real quickly. I think the task of management, if you misunderstand management as management of numbers, and people are machines that you can optimize to get the right numbers.
Human resources.
Human resources, literally in the resource sense, then you have the wrong understanding of humans, and you have the wrong understanding of management. If you are seeing management as primarily a people sport, where it's about motivating, it's about inspiring, it's about sparking, it's about team building, it's about aligning, you know, it's about creating a joint identity, a culture, and then the numbers will flow from that, then you are very defensible vis-a-vis AI, because AI cannot do that.
Let's shift gears a little bit. We've hinted at a little bit of this, but maybe sort of looking forward a little bit. So what do we do? What can the people here participating in this webinar, what can they do, whether at an individual level, or what can they push for at a government level? How do we go ahead and get out ahead of this, make sure we have the proper guardrails? make sure we have ourselves prepared to move forward. What steps do we take to make sure we're shaping this future instead of it just shaping us?
Yeah, I mean, so for starters, right, I would say as an individual, as a professional in particular, you have to take data science courses, whether that's at Hult or whether that's on a MOOC somewhere, a massively online system. You have to get better at understanding how the machine works with data, whether the data is clean, whether it's high quality, whether what comes out is what you think should be coming out, and exercise critical thinking, right? Don't just take the machine's word for granted. So for that, you need to do data science and get your arms around that. At the same time, I'm coming back around to get better at being human. Take those emotional intelligence courses, team building, negotiating, networking, selling ideas to each other, managing through conflict, right? Aligning different agendas. All of that is tremendously important. If you compare data science with that soft part, you will be a winner. And lots of employers out there will tell you that. On a sort of more of a governance or regulatory front, Mark and I have been developing this concept of a multi-stakeholder Congress. We believe that certainly everybody who is listening, who is, the up-and-coming elite of countries, needs to get involved in a multi-stakeholder Congress to debate these issues and then kick up the really big ones to government decision makers. So we have dubbed this the Cambrian Congress. Why Cambrian? Because of the Cambrian era and the explosion of life. In that era, we want to give it a positive frame. It's all about harnessing opportunity for humankind in a safe way. It's not about preventing opportunity. And so we called it a Cambrian Congress that will then generate what we called a digital Magna Carta that will enshrine certain basic rights for all individuals in rich or in poor countries alike, based on which we can be respectful to the individual and then design solutions to harness growth ethically, right? That's what I would say. So the individual level and then the policy level. Right? Anything else you would add to that, Mark? Just, be up to speed on this stuff and don't treat it as optional, even if you're not a techie, even if you're not an engineer or you don't want to end up in a tech business field, you do have to get smart on this stuff and have a voice.
Along similar lines, are a few questions about the role that government will play in AI regulation. And we've seen, and you alluded to some of this before, some different approaches throughout the world. The GDPR in the EU, for example, different ways that China and the US are reacting to this and other countries as well. Give us a sense of your take on the role of government in regulating this and how you balance that against freedom for innovation and similar transformation.
Let me start. It seems that it needs to be a combination of proactive and reactive. One of the reactive laws that recently came up in California is the bot disclosure law. If you are running a bot in interacting with customers or people in general, then it must disclose that it is not a person. And that is to say, in very specific settings where it has a goal of affecting a vote or convincing you to buy a product, and that's a really a novel development. Really, nothing like that has existed anywhere else. And it's a start. It's too weak, but it's a start. These are the kinds of things that are coming reactively, and proactively. Of course, there's a lot of discussion, and Olaf alluded to the GDPR and so on.
Yeah, government is definitely needed. Look, I mean, GDPR was a very good, useful signal to the rest of the world that we need to respect the individual. yes, it's too general. We believe it needs to be more application specific, because this could then open up more room for innovation, right? If you make every bot, no matter what they do, give it the requirement that it be transparent in how it explain itself, you're probably missing out on a lot of innovation opportunity, because not every startup entrepreneur can afford to design that into their bot. But that's now the conversation that needs to be had based on a very good signal that was sent. But we believe that this cannot be led by elites only. We have all seen various elites in this space become active. Large internet corporations, data corporations have started the partnership on artificial intelligence because they realize there are these issues out there. Scientists have signed the Asilomar principles. Engineers, such as in the IEEE, have launched various ethics and policy committees on which Mark and I serve. I also serve on the UK All-Parliamentary AI Governance Group, which is now a separate initiative that is also coming back around to the same realization that this must not just be government, just be scientists or engineers or just be business people, but really involve civil society. Why? Because all this data business touches on our identity, touches on our livelihoods. It touches the fabric of our families, of our societies, right? So we all need to have a voice. And AI actually allows us, for the first time in innovation history, to solicit individual views and synthesize them into patterns and into votes and decisions. So it can be done. And yes, we need to innovate new decision and voting mechanisms, but that can be done. So we believe that it's all of these stakeholders working together, and we have a method for it. There's a method to the madness. Part of it we're describing in chapter 8 of the book, and part of it you would still have to stay tuned for.
Like business itself and like the economy, and I mean, this to some extent, technology runs across borders. So it raises issues of multiculturalism, whether it's in business, how does it affect international business and the multicultural experience that requires? It raises questions about security and privacy, and different approaches to that in different countries. I guess as you look across this and we talk about sort of, coming up with a sense of we'll just say guardrails for this or guidelines for this development, how do you pull all of that global difference in and think about that, whether it's as a business person or as just in a regulatory environment and that sort of thing? How do we balance those competing values and those competing experiences?
It's very, very difficult, right? So Mark and I serve on various forums where it's becoming very clear that countries aren't seeing eye to eye necessarily. The biggest difference, of course, is between China and the Western world, right? China is driving a rather sort of techno-communitarian Confucianism about all of this, which, as I said before, subordinates privacy and personhood to societal stability. The West is very much focused on this very individualist enlightenment framework that says, look, the person first, everything else later. Both have problems and promises. And the real recipe, frankly, is to get into rooms together and start debating, start talking, start laying out points of view. When we talk to our friends in China, many, many good points get made in China that have nothing to do with government with government control of dissidents, etc. But that simply have to do with people needing certain things in their lives, and coming back around to China having, for instance, done a fantastic job lifting 400, 500 million people out of poverty over the last 40 years. I mean, that's a phenomenal thing to do, and of course, it's come at great cost as well. But to listen to these points of view is a good starting point. As we describe in chapter 8, It's not like the United Nations can simply step in and regulate this stuff. That doesn't work. It hasn't really worked very well ever for very hairy problems, with few exceptions. And it's really about different concentric circles of negotiations and negotiation forums that can create a shared mindset, and will then also lead people to self-regulate, right? So this issue of data ownership, for instance, yes, at some point government needs to step in, ideally internationally, about giving individuals data ownership over their own data. But there's a lot that entrepreneurs and large corporate organizations can do already by saying, look, for all the data that we have, our customers will retain ownership. There are business models you can structure around that. So we don't need to wait for government to take action.
Makes sense. I'll just throw this question out here because Mohammed asked a few, and I want to definitely get to one, and it's one that I particularly like. So I'll take moderator's prerogative and throw this out.
Okay.
What do you think about consciousness in artificial intelligence and the possibilities for that, or where it stands and where it might go?
That's a good one.
I like that question.
Yes.
So I actually think that if you talk to anyone working in AI, developing some portion of the algorithms and the new techniques and so on, and ask them, could you create consciousness? I have a blank check here. How much would it cost? I think essentially everyone would say, no, I can't do that. It doesn't matter how much you pay me. Partly because it's not well understood, but partly because what we are aiming for with AI is in fact not related to creating consciousness. It's the working definition for the general artificial intelligence, which is considered the holy grail, is technology which can perform any task that a human can perform at least as well as a human. And that is a measure of performing tasks, and not a measure of whether it has a sense of itself, right? So that's my answer.
No,
What's
that's
your
a
answer?
great. No, that's definitely right. One way we tend to answer this question. The other way is this: amongst all the scholars out there, Dan, as you know, that we interviewed, there's very little consensus as to what consciousness actually is. The expert opinion we hear most often is that consciousness is what they call an emergent property, meaning our brain is constructed in such a way that certain things collide, and all of a sudden we get this phenomenon that we call consciousness that sort of bubbles up. And emergent means it's not like A plus B plus C equals consciousness, right? You cannot deduce it or construct it like that, but it's rather something that happens in very complex system of systems that just appears, and we often can't explain it. So the answer to the question, the other answer would be that it may not be something we're aiming for, and we may never purposefully achieve, but it's something that could just happen along the way, right? Especially if you define consciousness as self-awareness. And then the bigger question I would tell to Mohammed is actually, once that happens and we have some degree of whatever juvenile or basic consciousness, what happens if we don't have conscience at the same time? Meaning a set of guiding values for these machines that will actually guide consciousness. Because cognition and consciousness without conscience, a moral guidance system, that's really dangerous, right?
The AI sociopath, as it were.
Yes, exactly.
Security is another note that's come up in several of the questions here. Let's talk specifically about that. I mean, given that this, as you phrased it, Olaf, this is getting into our brains and getting into our lives in a much deeper, more pervasive way. How confident can we be that we'll be able to secure this, that we'll be able to keep ourselves and our lives secure from even greater influence than what we already see in the Facebooks and Twitters and other things that are already influencing our decisions?
I think there are a couple of reasons to be optimistic, and one big reason to be worried. There's unprecedented focus on the issues of societal and psychological impact of technology now, in anticipation of things potentially going wrong, right? So that there are a lot of groups that are convening, talking about algorithmic ethics and AI and ethics. All of the students in the AI lab at Berkeley are concerned about the societal impacts of what they're building. And so there are reasons to be optimistic that we'll be paying attention. The reason that to worry is that that there are aspects of this at scale where the effects won't be known until they're known. They're everywhere, and so for that reason, there's a sense that we really should be paying careful attention. And the second reason that I'm optimistic is that there are groups like the group that I'm working with, the Center for Human Compatible Artificial Intelligence, trying to reinvent AI from the ground up, factoring safety in. And there, it's really based on a kind of a common ground idea of safety, no one wants their leg ripped off, that sort of safety, right? The protections that really need to be built in from the ground up. So that's the view from where I sit. How about from where you sit?
Yeah, no, I would second that, and certainly you do that work on an everyday basis. I would say from a cybersecurity angle, just to add that element on top of it, we have talked to some of the best known experts out there launching and running startups, trying to beat AI-based malware with their own AI-based technologies. And we've seen some or heard about some astounding techniques that seem very sophisticated. Everybody, of course, who works in the field will tell you there is really no way to win that race. And here really it is a race because you're always racing against somebody who's trying to beat you. And there it's about recognizing threats as they come in and mitigating them and always staying a step or two ahead. But there is no way to completely win that race because hackers have gotten, as regular business people have gotten much more globalized, organized, and capitalized, so have hackers as well. And so we're dealing now with elite hackers that create malware, and there's no way to win it other than stay ahead 1 or 2 steps at any time.
There was trying to figure out how to phrase this question. It's an interesting one, and one that I know all three of us really like, that came up. You mentioned earlier that as these systems are trying to predict your preferences and that sort of thing, they assume that a person is fixed, that that it may not change, or it may not take fully into account how your beliefs, how your attitudes may change over the time. And there was a question about maybe part of the problem is those recommender systems are very much linked to accuracy and getting it more and more accurate. And there was a question about how you think a little bit of serendipity mixed into there might help solve that problem. Just twisting that a little bit, as you look at AI that looks at our past actions and tries to predict for us, and as we give more control over these things, I guess, what role does random chance play into this? What role does serendipity play into this? What role does just our ability to choose something that may not be the wisest thing, but just might be more fun, play into this? I guess, where do we have that? How do we maintain that personal control to not always do maybe what's best for us or what's particularly recommended for us?
There are some websites, some services that do that as a matter of premeditated programming, right? So we have heard of dating websites that actually randomize certain, or maybe randomize is the wrong word, but try to mix certain factors, variables into partner matching where they know that you and your partner have different inclinations. And that's because they know from human psychology that couples can't be completely the same, or they lose interest, right? And so they have figured out which personality variables can be different so as to spark interest in each other, and where you have to stay closely aligned. So there's some precedent out there. I can't remember whether it was Netflix or Amazon, but one of them has now started randomizing some of their choices or selections for you in order to keep things fresh. Otherwise, you keep seeing the same old movies over and over and over again. Then there is the manual way to do this. When you're on Facebook and you are seeing the same people commenting about the same political events all the time, deliberately click on websites that you would normally not click on. So if you're of political persuasion A, deliberately go to political persuasion B, click on their sites and see what people are saying there. The algorithms will pick that up as part of your behavior. And by the way, it's also to make a point to the internet companies that you are much more complex than just belonging to one camp, right? And then the fourth point is we all have to demand that these algorithms not just measure us historically, but that they understand how we want to change and evolve and be different, because all of us, and some of you on the line, wouldn't be going, or considering to go to business school if it wasn't for the fact that you wanted to evolve and change and grow as a person and become somebody slightly different, right? Maybe that's just being a better professional, a better manager, or becoming a C-level executive one day. But the machine really needs to pick up on those aspirations and those complexities in life. And currently it doesn't. But that is what many scientists are now working on.
And just a personal note as we start wrapping up here, that's one thing that's made as concerning as many of these developments are, there's so many sort of equally or even more opportunistic or advantageous possibilities out there. And we talk about cybersecurity. There may be an AI answer to cybersecurity, or that will help us with that, and the combination of human and computer expertise. It may not be a one-to-one ratio, a good answer for every question, but we're at least answering those questions. And I'm excited that all of you are here sort of thinking about these topics, because more and more questions are coming, and we could talk for days here. So anyway, just in conclusion, gentlemen, any last thoughts?
So, I mean, I would thoroughly impress on all of you, try to maintain the positive outlook on this, as we have done in this book. There are phenomenal growth horizons in front of us, whether it's on curing cancer, or matching people to better jobs, or big things like understanding climate change better and then either mitigating it or adapting to it. That's already starting to happen with AI tools. Trying to predict where in the world and when in the world food crises happen. That can be done with complex models of AI models that combine, modeling on soil conditions with weather conditions, with political conditions, with infrastructure, with market pricing, to understand what the evolving dynamics are and where they lead us. We have talked to scientists who are using AI to enable people to avoid, sliding back into recurrences of depression or Alzheimer's or things of that nature, and being able to call for help automatically because your device understands how your mental state is changing. We have talked to an Israeli startup about healing broken connections in brains. So there's lots and lots and lots of really, really exciting stuff out there. Look at the opportunity, get excited about it, get involved, and then have a voice and be responsible, right? That's really what we're advocating for. Anything you want to add to that?
You know, it's hard to top a nice closing like that. I would like to just remind everyone that we tend to anthropomorphize, to think that the machine is actually got a mind of its own, and that's really not true. In many systems, when you're interacting with it and it's feeling more and more like there's a person, there actually probably is a person behind the curtain, or there was a person who did some of the programming to give it that kind of narrative story, the element that feels really like a human. That's probably a human.
Yeah, and you should get to know those humans and their motivations, ask questions, and then make sure that your own agency, right, your own ability to project your choices and your power into those designs, that is being accepted, right? So we definitely wrote the book in that spirit, and I might just do a closing on the closing to say that we are more than happy if you come to Hult and you come to San Francisco, or we run into each other in one of our 6 campuses. We are jointly more than happy to sign the book and write a dedication, because we believe that you guys are that global generation of responsible innovation leaders that will really carry this thing forward into the next frontier.
Thanks again, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Have a great evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you may be, where the sun is shining or not shining, as it were. And thanks again, everyone. Take care.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Yes, thank you so much. That was amazing. Thank you for that, Olaf and Mark. That was very insightful. And thank you, everyone else, for joining. As we said before, a recording of this will also be sent out in the follow-up email over the next few days. But if you would like to know more about Hult and our courses, please visit us at hult.edu. So that's all from us today. Thank you very much for this session, Olaf and Mark. And yeah, thanks again, everyone, and have a lovely day. Take care, guys. Bye.
Thank you.